how are you?
Very well. Enjoying a bit more heat than we've been accustomed to this last
I'm
week.
not sure I got it heat, warmth.
Warmth, gently warmed.
So have you been gently warmed as you reflected on Mark 6, 1 to 13?
Yeah, so Mark 6, 1 to 13, again, it's a tale of two halves, really, isn't it? The first half is Jesus returns to his home town, his home village perhaps, and gets a pretty rum reception in the synagogue, where they're a bit unreceptive to his teaching, and he is unable to perform many works there, but he just, it says, heals a few people. And then the next bit where he's sending out the 12, 2 by 2. And I suppose the bit that I alighted on was the bit about how he was unable to perform many works there because of their unbelief.
Right, yeah.
Because of their unbelief. So that suggests that the power of Jesus is to some extent dependent on our faith. And it's interesting, the passage we were looking at last week, because again there, the woman with the hemorrhages, the flow of blood, she approached Jesus and she touched the hem of his garment and releases his power, which heals her. It seems without him ostensibly knowing who she is. So again, there's something about our faith releasing Jesus' power for healing here, which is curious, because it gets us into the whole theological conundrum of what faith is and what our part is in realizing the effectiveness of faith. So to what extent is it down to us? Sometimes I've talked about faith as trust in Jesus, that enables us to be and do things which then put us in touch with a power and an activity that brings about a result.
Mm-hmm.
So it's not a little thing called faith inside me that leads to the result. Faith leads me to act in such a way that I'm put in touch with a power that brings about a result. It's like I have faith in my electricity system at home. My faith in the electricity system causes me to act in such a way as to switch a light on, which brings about a result.
Yeah. And we'd have no idea that you had faith in your electricity system until you turned the switch.
Yeah.
You've got to do something, and faith is always manifested in action.
Yeah. So here we have the action of the woman with hemorrhages and the lack of action of these people here. But you've got this difference in emphasis between Protestant and Catholics here, haven't you, in terms of the place of our activity in terms of realizing faith and realizing the power of God. And one of the ways it's likened to is, are we kittens or are we baby monkeys? Do you know that one?
I do not know that one, Mike.
So if you're a baby kitten, then you're helpless and your mother has to pick you up by the scruff of the neck and carry you.
Right.
In
Is
other
that
words,
a Protestant or a Catholic?
That would be the Protestant one.
Right.
That's because none of our works can contribute to this.
Oh, I see.
Yeah?
Okay, yeah.
Whereas for the more Catholic version, the baby monkey, what does the baby monkey do to be carried? Holds out an arm, and the mother monkey takes it, puts it on the back. So are we like the kitten or are we like the baby monkey? And the answer is yes.
Yeah.
In other words, it's both, because actually if you look, say, at Luke 16, Jesus gives 3 examples of how we might be lost. In the example of the lost coin, we're totally passive and we can't do anything, like the baby kitten. Yeah? Then there's the middle one, which is the sheep that's in thorns. All the sheep can do is bleat, and is found. And then with the prodigal son, the prodigal comes to his senses and comes home. So there's a whole spectrum of ways in which actually the power of Jesus can be released. But one of the chastening things about this particular passage is that it seems to suggest if you do nothing, it'll be without Jesus then.
Yeah. Well, yes, and I think there are lots of other examples where one way or another, we discover that faith is about action.
Yeah.
You've got to do something. Otherwise the faith isn't there. Faith without works, I mean, I know that sounds a bit too Catholic, but faith without works doesn't produce anything.
Yeah. So where were you in the passage?
So, well, I was struck. So, last week, yesterday wasn't yesterday. Feels like yesterday. Last week, we were talking about. We had, as you say, Jairus' daughter, the woman with the hemorrhage, 2 miracles that were performed, and a real sense coming at the end of that passage that things were, as it were, going well for Jesus. He then goes to his hometown, and he teaches in the synagogue. And as you pointed out to me earlier, that's the last time that Mark mentions Jesus in the synagogue in Mark's Gospel. Teaching in the synagogue, and people are astounded at his teaching. Then they start to ask some questions, and where's this wisdom come from? And isn't this? And interestingly, they don't say the son of Joseph; they say the son of Mary, which commentators, the ones I've looked at, say is a reflection on their casting aspersions on his parenthood.
And they name his brothers, but they don't name him or his sisters, which suggests they're putting him on a par with his sisters, which is a bit of a slur as well in those times.
So it was really a kind of, this suddenly goes downhill quite rapidly. And casting aspersions on his parents are, casting aspersions on his relatives, and basically then saying that this is not somebody for us to pay attention to. We have no faith in him. We can't have faith in that person. And Jesus then reflects, prophet is not without honour in his own country, which apparently is a phrase that would be quite familiar. It exists in contemporary literature in other forms. It's something you could say about yourself or about another. And then Jesus is amazed at their lack of belief. So they're amazed at his teaching, and then within a couple of verses, he's amazed at their lack of belief. And I was struck that we've got a pattern here about resistance, people resisting belief and resisting what he's about. And you see in the beginning of this passage, in verse 1, Jesus arrives with his disciples. Now, I think I'm right that in Luke and Matthew's sort of equivalent passage, the disciples aren't mentioned. So you get a sense, Mark is writing this for a community of Christians who are suffering persecution and who are reassured that Jesus arrives with them. They are facing resistance just as Jesus has. So this is kind of getting them into the picture. Yeah. Not to say the disciples weren't there, but Mark makes a point of referring to them. And then, as sending the disciples out, which is the next half of the passage, and what we come to, presumably next week, is the beheading of John the Baptist, which is, as you were talking about last week, is an interruption in the narrative. We've got the sending out of the disciples, and then beheading of John the Baptist, and then the return of the disciples. Now, you could take the beheading of John the Baptist out and just have the sending out and the return, and that is, that would be a narrative that would stand on its own. But the interruption is saying there is danger. Now, we haven't got to that passage yet, but that sense that there is the hope for expectation from last week. That expectation faces resistance in his hometown. Then hope for expectation in the sending out of the disciples, except for the fact of shaking the dust off your feet. So you're going to have resistance. And then you've got this huge example of resistance in the beheading of John the Baptist. Yeah. So just a sense that, if we are embarked on this journey with him, we too will face resistance.
And we sometimes think, oh, those disciples, they, at least they had Jesus in front of them and around them. They could see what he was doing. We haven't got that. It's much more difficult for us. But just put yourself in the shoes of one of those disciples. Jesus has such a rough ride in his own village where he grew up, and then he has the chutzpah to turn around and say to them, right, your turn to go out now, and by the way, don't take any money, don't take any bags or anything like that, just depend on the local hospitality, having just experienced utter rejection from his own people.
Yeah.
So it ain't easy.
Yeah. Good. Thank you.
Thank you.